Just to recap, we have selection of a victim. Usually there'll be some form of vulnerability. You'll have gaining access to the victim by putting somebody who's a predator in a position where they can have physical access to the child. You'll have recruiting of both the victim as well as any other caregivers to normalize private interactions so that there's access so that they can be in private. And then as they're in private, as they're having their sessions, you have the desensitization that happens both psychologically and physically to start to bring the child into those inappropriate interactions that are the actual acts of abuse. So now that we've covered some of these kind of basic fundamental aspects of grooming, I want to go over them again, but just look at it a slightly different way, okay? And that is that as we go from where the predator is trying to gain access to the child to be one-on-one, I want to reinforce the concepts that each of those phases is a sort of obstacle. And what I mean by that is out in the community, outside of an institution, in order for a predator to put himself in a position where he has access to victims, where he can move on to those other stages, he has to actually do a lot of work in order to get in that position. If he uses a vocation to have access to children, then he actually has to go through the process of becoming a coach, or he has to go through the process of being a bus driver, or go through the process of being a scoutmaster. Or if he's simply helping single mothers out in his community, then he has to do the work of being the handyman and going and doing these things. And so that's kind of a form of an obstacle that he would have to overcome in order to do that. And on top of that, he would have to spend the extra time to gain the trust of the family. He would have to spend the extra time and effort to get the trust of the child, to normalize being able to talk about sexual themes. He would have to come up with excuses to be alone with the child, so that if people saw him as an adult being alone with a child, they wouldn't think that that was weird or unusual. So there's a lot of different obstacles that the predator has to overcome in order to gain access to a child. Now, I want you to consider this, and that is when you have an institution such as the church, which elevates men to the position of a bishop, which incorporates into the culture of the church that the bishop should be spending one-on-one time alone with children, discussing sexual themes, keeping those discussions private, and that the bishop is a man of God chosen by the Spirit and should be inherently trusted and assumed to be righteous. What that does is the institution facilitates this process of grooming by automatically removing all of these barriers, so that as soon as the bishop is called, then if he happens to be a predator, and remember, we can't tell the difference between somebody who's a predator and somebody who's not a predator. Maybe he'll look older and trusted. He'll seem like, somebody that is like your grandfather, that, he's not a sexual predator. He's too old for that. Well, you can't tell the difference. And there are predators of all different ages. But as soon as somebody becomes a bishop, then all of those obstacles are gone, because it's normal for the bishop to spend a lot of time with kids. Parents automatically trust the bishop. The bishop should be meeting one-on-one with kids multiple times a year and talking to them about sexual themes. The bishop should be trusted. He's a man of God. All of these things are how the institution facilitates abuse, by removing the obstacles that would normally be there.